Hey guys, welcome back to Why Not Be Authentic. We are here today with one of my most favorite people ever, Patricia. And Patricia is someone that I actually met on TikTok where I started this platform almost a year ago in August is Why Not Be Authentic. And she became my moderator and we have just become so close ever since. So without further ado, I am so excited to have you, Patricia. Tell everyone about yourself.
Thank you very much, Christina. My name is Patricia Tomlin. I live in Middle Tennessee. I have a very long backstory. I've lived in several states. I lived in China for a few years. I've had a bunch of different jobs, and one of the things that has kind of been a through thread for a lot of my life was depression. We didn't know what it was when I was a kid, because who knew?
Right.
I can pinpoint when it became a real, it was always been a little bit of a problem, just lack of motivation, that kind of thing. But when I was 16, my mother had a stroke. Hello, Lavu.
By the way, guys, we go on TikTok a lot and we are friends. So we're probably going to keep chatting away on different subjects because ADHD here, right? Y'all know that. But that's one of her friends always comes on when she's live
Yeah,
streaming. So continue.
that's my boy Laohu, which is Chinese for tiger. But my mom had a stroke. She was 43, I was 16. She came through it famously. She's alive and healthy now, as is my father. But it was at 16 when I faced the prospect of that loss. And when the entire rest of my family did this, like, now what do we do?
Right.
Dad was focused on mom. My sister was out of the house already in college, and she had her own stuff going on. She had jobs in school. And I was a junior in high school and just basically taking care of myself, which I was completely capable of doing. My
Right.
mom and dad raised my sister and I to be independent. If something had happened and we'd had to live on our own, we would have survived. But when you're
Right.
16, you're not thinking like that. And it messed with my head.
I'm sure. I mean, first of all, our brains are not fully developed until we're 25 years old, right?
Hmm.
And then secondly, I mean, your mom is your mom. So going through the possibility, her having a stroke and the possibility of something happening to her, I can't imagine what you were going through emotionally.
It was terrifying, to be really honest. And none of my peers understood what I was going through. And it's just like, I don't know what to do. And so
Right.
I just kept going in the direction I was going. Majored in theater production at Illinois State. Spent some time doing theater in Chicago. Um, Spent a lot of my college years doing some drugs and a lot of alcohol. And it wasn't until many years later when I finally got into some form of therapy and I was telling my therapist my life story, and she said, "Oh yeah, you might have been self-medicating there." It's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and that's what happens a lot of times, right? When we
Hmm.
go through something traumatic or we're struggling with depression and anxiety, guys, Patricia also live streams now on TikTok and is a big, huge advocate of mental health. And this is something we see people come in and constantly talk about is they self-medicate because they just want to feel better.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. Um, there's a lot more to my story, and it's long and twisty. So I'm going to try to shorten it as much as I can. Um, I went to China as a missionary in 2004 and had a full-on breakdown. And my team leader sent me home because they didn't
So
know what to do with me.
that's the story of how you came back to the States
The first time,
the first time. Okay. And how long did you say you were there the first time in China?
just a year, just a year. So I came back, got on meds, got therapy, got my head screwed on straight. And I spent that entire time just praying, just praying. God, I want to go back, but I don't want to go back if you don't want me there. And then I said, okay, if these people sign off on me going back, I'll go back. And every one of them signed off. And within a couple of months, I was back in China at the school I was at before, with the people I was with before, doing what I was doing before. And it was great. And after that, I stayed there another 11 years. Changed schools in the middle of it. Ended up working for a corporate English school. That was interesting.
Yeah.
They paid me well. And then in 2017, I came back to the States because I felt like it was time. And it was, because there was a regime change in China and things got a little more hostile towards foreigners. And then COVID happened. So I've been back 7 years.
I bet that was amazing for you.
It was amazing.
I've never been to China and I want to go so bad. Looking back in that first time that you started showing signs and symptoms of depression when you were in China, was it something that you specifically went to your missionary and told them you were struggling, or did they noticeably see it?
They noticeably saw it.
They did.
I was having a really bad case that couldn't get out of bed.
Oh, yeah.
And my roommate noticed it, and the conversations began. That was really hard. That was really, really hard. And I came back and I went to my ministry's campus in Tennessee. And my mom's going to see this, and she doesn't know a lot of this that I'm telling you. So this is going to get interesting. I would come downstairs for breakfast and get so exhausted just from that, I'd have to go back up and take a nap. And it was like that for several months.
Yeah.
And then they slowly began to get me into working again. And 18 months later, I was back in China.
Do you feel like you went back too soon, or do you feel like the timing was good?
No, I think the timing was perfect. And I went through a rough patch in China. I mean, the thing about mental health is it'll run in cycles.
Right.
You know, there are going to be times when I'm skating and everything's cool, and then I'll fall through the ice.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. So instead of taking 2 hours to get to Beijing, it took 30 minutes. So going to Beijing all the time was easy from where I was. Right. And I got therapy there from a delightful woman, and that kept me from having to come back to the States. I had some really good support there amongst my friends in China, and I will be forever grateful for that.
You know, Patricia, when we go through these peaks and valleys, I'm going to say these peaks and valleys of depression, you're right. It's not a button you can push and make the depression and the anxiety go away. It is a peak and valley. You've got those highs and you've got those lows, but you can definitely relate to when you get those lows. You were saying that in China, you couldn't get out of bed, and that's how they noticed that you were struggling. There's a lot of people out there that feel the same way that you felt. And I think the biggest question, and a lot of people ask, you know, how, even if someone is saying you need to get help, you need to get therapy, you need to do this or that, it's very hard to move forward with that. And do you feel like you were forced to do that? Or is it something that you were like, okay, I'm glad someone saw this. I really need to go get therapy?
A little of both. To be really honest, I was angry and resentful at first. Because I was raised to be independent.
Well, like, and when you grew up, you brought up a good point earlier, not meaning to cut you off, but when you grew up, when we were younger, we didn't talk about depression or anxiety. It was not something that you talked about. It was not as much of a conversation or topic. People didn't want to talk about it. They wanted to hide it, or they didn't even know what it meant. Right. And so things have changed so much since then, but it's something that thank God, right? Especially for the newest generation and people that are struggling. That's the biggest thing, is we want to stop the stigma associated with it.
Yeah.
it's not something that's per se normal to talk about, you don't know what to do.
You don't. You really don't. And one of the things that happened when I came back to the States in '04 was the people I was my sending agency that I was coming back to in Tennessee,
Hmm.
they were like, "Okay, so how do you want to spin this to everybody here? You're coming back to surprise your parents for Christmas, what's this going to look like?" It's like, just tell them I went crazy and had to come home. If you
Yeah.
if you want to make it really nice, you can say I'm exhausted. But I just didn't want to deal with trying to soft sell it to people who may or may not have understood. And
Did your parents understand?
they were very concerned, very, very concerned. And I don't blame them. If it had been
Right.
my child, I'd have been concerned. But like I said, I was raised to be independent. My parents were on that list of people that needed to approve of my going back to China, which was really the hard one because my mom and dad didn't want me in China to begin with. They didn't
Oh,
want me overseas. I went anyway.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just on the phone with my mom, and she said, "Well, thank God you're not in China." It's like, "Yes, mother."
Well, I want to back up a little bit. So when you were in high school, let's
Mhm.
back up to when you were in high school and your mom had a stroke. There are a lot of people, a lot of teenagers who have lost parents, or their parents have had a stroke or a heart attack or been diagnosed with cancer. We were seeing a lot of that in especially younger and younger people.
Yes.
You said your coping was really just turning to drugs and alcohol.
Well,
What did
not
that
right
look like
away. Not right away. In college. In high school, I was still very active in my church,
for you? Yeah.
and they had a great choir program and a great youth program, and that disappeared for me when I got into college. So I went the other route. And again, I want to emphasize that this is nobody's fault.
Right.
I made these choices for good or ill. I made them, and I have dealt with the consequences of it, which I think is really an important aspect of dealing with depression. Because oftentimes we will, you hear people, they blame their trauma, they blame their parents, they blame the kids in the schoolyard, and all this stuff. And yeah, there is a little trauma in there that you need to deal with. But ultimately, most of the really bad crap that happens in a person's life comes out as comes out as a response in their personal choices. That's not saying that some people haven't had it really, really bad,
Right.
but I didn't have it that bad. I made stupid choices,
But you know
and
what?
so I own that.
I I love that, it's huge to take accountability, especially when you're struggling and you do. And I've done it. I have definitely done it where I have turned when I was younger to drugs or alcohol. Even within the past couple of years, and that's something that I've really had to work on, especially not numbing with alcohol to make you feel better. But when you said that you haven't, a lot of people had it worse, I think that that is why a lot of people don't want to share their story, because I think that they feel like theirs wasn't as bad as someone else's. But at the same time, you went through it. Your mom had a stroke at 16 years old. It's trauma. That's PTSD, right? So
Yeah.
it's completely understandable how that affected you the way it did, and
Hmm.
for you, when you got in college to turn to drugs and alcohol. And I have to tell you, first of all, thank you so much for sharing this story, because there are people that may not be able to relate to everything, but there's people that can relate to the stuff that you've gone through, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and so never, ever, ever say that you haven't gone through something that other people, have gone through worse, or haven't gone through as much as other people, because it's valid what you went through. And that
Hmm.
is very traumatic. And then having to take
Yes.
care of yourself, right?
And see, the thing is, and this is goes right along with what you're saying. Yeah, maybe my story doesn't sound as bad as somebody else's story, but that doesn't mean it wasn't bad for me.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean that what you went through is invalidated. It doesn't mean what Joe Blow down the street went through isn't valid. It's all valid. It's all pain. It's all trauma. And we all respond to it the way we respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we really need to be having a lot of compassion for others and for ourselves in that.
We do. We
Because a
do.
lot of the times we don't,
That lack of empathy and positive
Mhm.
intent. And this is something that my husband and I were actually having a conversation about earlier, having positive intent. I feel like it goes in line with empathy. Someone may go through something and then turn to alcohol, or may get a hot temper and get really mad at people, and you don't know why, because you don't know what they're going through. And I think
Right.
that the more that we share our stories and talk about it, the more that other people are going to say, you know what, you're right, what I went through may be different than someone else, but it's validated, that was true for me,
Yeah.
just like you were saying.
And there's this thing in the world, the whole get over it. It's like, no, yeah.
Isn't
There is
that the worst thing that someone could say to you?
yes, that is absolutely the worst thing that someone could say to me, and I want to punch them when they do. Sorry, that's just the truth.
No,
But at the
it's,
same
it's
time,
the truth.
there is an aspect of get over it. But it's not like just get over it. It's more like, okay, you need to process this stuff out, own what you need to own, let go of what isn't yours to own, forgive them, forgive yourself,
Mhm.
forgive God, because he and I fight sometimes over things that have happened in my life. I'm a
I think that's a normal feeling too.
yeah, but people feel guilty about it. It's like, excuse me, God's big enough.
Yeah.
He's big enough.
Yeah.
And
I love that your faith has kept you so strong.
there are times when I don't really have a lot of faith. It's that whole mustard seed thing.
Right.
Um, Sometimes mine's not even that big, but
So,
I'm not going to give up on it. I, like so many other people, I have been burned by religious entities. And, I've gone through crisis of faith. I've gone through times when it's like, I don't know if I even want to talk to you again, God. I'm really mad. And he's like, okay, we'll talk again later when you're calmer.
yeah.
And the thing that I always get, always get from God that I don't always get from his people is I always get that compassion. I get
Mhm.
that tenderness. I get that, yeah, this was awful. And that's life on earth.
It is. But
That's
especially now too. I feel like with the way that our world is, and we just came off of what, a week ago, that there was an assassination attempt on our former president. I mean, our world is crazy.
yeah,
You know,
it is. And we've got a bunch of people in the world today who are not they're not doing their research before they make up their minds on things,
hmm
on the right and on the left. That's only making things worse.
it is. It is. 100%. But we could go on for days about politics. So we're going to save that one for another day, guys.
Another day.
Going back to China. So when you went back to China,
Mhm.
um, and you were there for, you said, 12 more years?
11 years.
11
11
years.
years.
11 years. And then you came back because you decided, it was time to come back.
Mhm.
How was that coping with coming back? Because I know you loved China so much.
Um, that was hard. Is hard.
I was going to say it's still hard for you, right?
Yeah, I came back to the ministry that I had sent me to China in the first place, and it was a case of I just didn't fit. I had so much more I could have offered that they didn't want. There are certain attitudes you find in ministry about age, women, single women. And, I wasn't fitting all of the normal roles that a good Christian wife was filling. or good Christian woman was feeling, because I wasn't a wife, I wasn't a mother. And it was just a bad fit. There's nobody at fault, but it created hurt in me. Okay, I understand there was no malice in anything. If anything, it was just a lack of understanding and a lack of communication. And so 2 years ago, it was like, I can't be here anymore. I have to leave here. And so I began looking for work, and I got a job in a nearby city and got an apartment, moved my cats in, and I have been struggling amongst the working poor ever since. It's hard to find work for more than $15 an hour.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, it is.
And you have a college degree.
And wild experience. 20 years in customer service. I was a manager for McDonald's and Burger King. You know, I've managed food services. I taught English. I mean, I worked in professional theater. I've done a lot.
Have you ever thought about going back to be a teacher here?
The thought crosses my mind every once in a while, and then I hear the horror stories.
Right.
I'm not qualified to teach anything but ESL, English as a second language, because all you really need for that is a certification, and I've got those. But I don't have a teaching certificate for English.
Right.
And you need to have one of those. You need to have a teaching certification to teach in the US. I don't have that. And I don't have the resources to go back to school. I could probably get them, but right now I have no debt. I am the only adult I know who has no debt.
I was about to say, you're the only person I think I have ever met that does not have any more debt. I am proud of you.
Oh, thank you. And that's the only thing that makes my living situation doable.
You bring up a really good point. And you know, you and I have talked about this, but not in depth, about you coming back to the States and really switching gears and just trying to do something so you know that you can survive. And you mentioned that you feel kind of stuck. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that sentiment. And I would love for you to elaborate more on that if you're open to it.
Sure. I work as a caregiver. I take care of people who need help doing daily basic things, like making food, going to the bathroom, getting baths, getting dressed. And that's what I do. And it's not intellectually stimulating. It's physically tiring. I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and I have old injuries that have come back and said, hey, remember us? I got back problems when I was unloading trucks at McDonald's in college. I got a bad shoulder from a car accident. Got bad feet from working at McDonald's. And so all of this stuff adds up, and I get home at night, it's like, I'm so tired.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of evenings when I don't want to do my TikTok lives. There are a lot of evenings when I don't want to participate in anything having to do with people, which is pretty sad, because one of the problems I have is I get very lonely. I live alone. I don't have any coworkers. I just have my clients. And so most of my social life is TikTok and people from church. And most of the evening activities at my church go away in the summer because people are having to deal with their kids. Nothing you know anything about.
Not at all. I never get interrupted. What are you talking about? She's walked in 3 times. Sorry, continue.
So while I'm in, I do feel stuck. I feel stuck because I don't have the resources to take a vacation or a long weekend. I've got medical issues that I need to have taken care of, and I'm having to squirrel away money to pay for my copays.
Right.
Which is better than it used to be, because it used to be I didn't have insurance. So we'll take that as a win. But yeah, it's really easy to get feeling stuck when it feels like you're not getting ahead. When at the end of the pay period, you're looking at your account and you're going, okay, got cat food, got cat litter, I've got food. I need to put gas in my car and I need to do laundry. Now I have to go to a laundromat to do laundry.
Right.
Because laundry facilities in my building are garbage. And so it's like, okay, figure out how to get the most out of my money every month. And so that's what I do. And it's that kind of budgeting and that kind of figuring things out. How am I going to pay? Not how am I going to pay for it, but where am I going to rob Peter to pay Paul?
Right.
Sometimes that wears on your mental health. That wears on your mental health. And most of my friends have husbands and kids, and so they've got their things they need to do. So that's one of the things that makes mental health hard for me, and the lack of resources. My state does not have great resources.
And you're in Tennessee, right?
I'm in Tennessee.
Yeah. I have to say, Patricia, you have brought up so many different things that I feel like so many people can relate to. I think about where we are today with inflation. It doesn't matter if you're on the right side or the left side, right? As far as politics go, we are in a world, an economy right now where we have horrible inflation. People are struggling to find jobs, especially as people get older. I know this from my dad when he got laid off. The older he got, it was like it was hard for him to find a job that paid what he needed to pay because they wanted to pay people that were younger that would take, pay that was less, and struggling to make ends meet. And there are so many people right now that can't even live. They can't feed their animals. They can't feed themselves. So to your point, you're working a job, which by the way, I've been a nursing assistant before, and that is one of the hardest jobs I think that there is out there. You're helping with activities of daily living, including cleaning up bowel movements and urine and bathing them and turning them and lifting them, which is a job in itself. But then struggling to make ends meet and feeling like you are just stuck and can't be where you want to be and do what you want to do. And so many people are struggling with that. And so many people can relate to what you're saying right now. And so my question for you is, what is your goal? What do you think would be your goal? And how do you think that you could live out the dream that you want to do?
That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I don't even think in those terms anymore.
And that's really sad. No wonder you're struggling. There's so many people that feel the same way. And when you are struggling to make ends meet and we're in the middle of inflation and our economy is horrible right now. And so groceries and everything is skyrocketed. The cost of living is skyrocketed. So you have to spend any time that you have working your butt off, right? And then being able to afford to go to counseling and get medication. There's so many people that have this, they're going through the same things that you're going through. And I'm glad that we touched on this subject because we need better mental health resources. We just do. And you are one of the most passionate people I have ever met. And you deserve live an amazing life where you want to live and doing what you want to do. And it sucks that in the economy in the world we live in today, it's not possible for a lot of people. It's not, because you can't afford the cost of inflation and housing. You can't afford to go and get your medication and therapy. I just want to applaud you for being vulnerable enough to share your story with us. And, I think a lot of people can relate to this.
Yeah. I also want to point out something really important, that for everything that is wrong in America right now, this is still the best place to be.
Yeah.
I had to teach a section on poverty in my English school. And, the Chinese think they're poor. Some of them are. Some of them are still like, there are places in China that still don't have electricity. I was living in a large city I had everything I could possibly want available to me, except for Pop-Tarts and Mountain Dew. You know, and most of my students didn't understand that most of the world's population is living on less than $2 a day.
In China?
No, in the world.
Oh, in the world. No, I didn't know that.
And so every time I get thinking about, oh, I'm so poor, I'm like, yeah, but you've got good shoes, you know? There are
This is
people
how
in the
much
world
of
who
an
don't have
amazing,
shoes.
this is how much of an amazing person you are. You are struggling yourself mentally with the things that you've gone through in the past, with your mom having a stroke at 16, worried that, she's not gonna be able to live the rest of her life. And thank God she is. And she's healthy now, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
she's healthier than I am.
And then going to China and struggling with depression, coming back, and then going back to China, and then having the religious trauma. Which that's
see,
something I've never experienced. I've heard of people experience it. I can see, I think, how because that I believe in God and I'm very religious. And
mhm.
if it wasn't for God, I don't feel like I could have made it through the things that I've gone through in my life. And I know that that's something you and I've talked about in links. But when you've got that higher belief, that belief in something higher and higher being and your faith, but then you are with a ministry that makes you question all of it. How
Mhm.
did you get through that?
This is gonna sound strange. I follow Jesus. I read his word and I do what his word says. And if I'm involved with a group of religious people that aren't doing that, I get away from them. My pastor will get up there in front of everyone and say, hey, don't trust me with this. Get in the word, test it out yourself. Make sure what I'm telling you is the truth, because I make mistakes.
Yeah,
And that kind of leadership goes a long way.
100%.
And I go to a church where if somebody has a question in the middle of the sermon, they'll say, hey, and then a discussion ensues. It's not a big church, but it's vital and it's active. And I got a Bible study starting next month that I'm excited about. And it's one of those situations where this is as close to the first century church as I've ever seen. You know, in
Yeah,
my house church, we have house churches, which is like in-home versions. We had a couple that was struggling financially and we passed a hat to help them make their rent. And
that's amazing.
that's what the church should do.
Right.
You know, there's a little smoking ring outside the church. We don't jump on people for smoking. You can't smoke in the building, but that's normal
Right.
everywhere now, right?
Mhm.
But nobody jumps on people about that because we're more interested in who, and this is so much a part of who I am as a Christian. I am so not interested in the externals. I'm just not. I'm
Right.
more interested in who you are as a person. I'm more interested in your character. I'm more interested in my character. Am I acting the way I want to act? Am I doing the things I know I should do? Am I not doing the things I know I shouldn't do? And that doesn't set me up with an impossible standard. It sets me up with a standard, but it also gives me the opportunity to be kind, to be the kind of person that I know Jesus wants me to be. And I'm not meaning to get this all religious because this is about mental
No,
health.
this is part of mental health. This is a huge issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is why people don't, I honestly feel like this is a big reason that people don't go to church. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm not going to church. That feels like a cult, or they're going to judge me. I feel like I'm going to burn when I walk in. Everyone's going to stare at me, whatever, because you're not dressed a certain way. You don't speak a certain way. You have tattoos, right? Like whatever it may be. And I think that those are the type of religious people that make churches and the belief in God and a higher being,
Yeah.
having faith, have a bad name.
Well,
Because
that was the issue that Jesus had with the Pharisees. They put too much stock in the traditions. They overburdened people with a sense of righteousness that they couldn't maintain.
Right.
And I'm not about that.
When you were in China and you mentioned that you and the missionary, the church that you were associated with there, that basically you weren't living up to their standards. How did they treat you? What did they do to make you have so much trauma that
Well, it wasn't the people in China that were the issue.
it was the affiliation, the church you were associated with?
It was the people in the States.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. The international church in my city is an extraordinary group of people. Okay, there were maybe 70 or 80 countries represented, and they were from all over US, Africa, Europe, Asia, South America, Australia, everywhere. And that church, it was a fellowship, and we looked after each other because we knew what the stresses were. And
Right.
even with the people that I worked with at the Christian school, it was, is everything okay? How are you doing? Da 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 da. Da. And if something was way out of line, it was gently and privately confronted. And if after the gentle private confrontation didn't happen, it happened with a couple more people. And we followed what was set out in scripture as a means of, okay, you're not meeting this scriptural standard. It's like, you're still not meeting the scriptural standard. And if
Really?
you just, oh yeah, yeah. But it was meant to be very gentle. And the whole point of it is to bring people back into right relationship. It's about the heart posture more than about what it is you're actually doing.
Right.
And that's important, you know? I mean, as a Christian, I'm called to a certain standard and I need to meet that standard, but I don't need somebody beating me up. And so they didn't beat anybody up.
Well, I'm proud of you for getting out of it. I'm proud of you for realizing that this is something that I just can't be a part of anymore because it made you feel that way. Like I said, there's a lot of even people in my family that don't go to church because of past experiences where they went to an establishment and it was like, if you're not dressed a certain way, if you don't act a certain way, if you don't look a certain way, if you have tattoos or you have piercings or you're too loud or you speak too much, you're too blunt and you speak about stuff you're going through. Well, that's not the right vision, right? That's not what we want for our church. We want to look together and be this, and that makes people not want to go to church. That makes people have that stigma against affiliations when it's associated with church. And so I'm so glad that you're talking about this topic. I don't honestly, I don't feel like this topic is ever talked about. And I think that it's something that needs to be talked about more because I feel like at the end of the day, we as human beings, like, I feel like we just want to be happy. We want peace and happiness, right? And we want to be able to take care of our family, our animals, our cost of living, and just live our life and be happy.
Yeah, that's pretty much what everyone wants. The problem
Yeah.
is, there seems to be a lot in this world that doesn't want us to have that. You would love my church.
Oh, would I?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think, there's one family that comes in dressed in their Sunday finest. We've got a couple of ladies that come in just to the nines. And then you've got guys in their cargo shorts and Harley Davidson t-shirts and do-rags.
See, that's what I love. I've told you before, I go to Elevation Church, which is a non-denominational church, very well known. And I go to one of their campuses that are close to where I live. And one thing that I absolutely, and I grew up Presbyterian.
So did
I
I.
also, yeah, I grew up Presbyterian. And then I also, half of my, childhood years went to a Baptist church because a lot of my family is also Baptist. But I feel like the non-denominational churches are the ones that I always felt like was home because I felt like they related the Bible and the verses to today's world. But I also felt like they did not judge you. You didn't feel like you had
Yeah.
to look a certain way, dress a certain way, act a certain way, be a certain way. Like, obviously, be a kind human being, right? But they didn't, Elevation Church doesn't make you feel like you are going to walk in and leave feeling like you just hate yourself. And
Hmm.
we need more of that. And we need more people in this world that are just happy that we can find a place where we can meet like-minded individuals that have the same beliefs that we have, but we're also kind to each other and don't
Yeah.
judge each other, and that's what my church Elevation's like. And I'm so glad that you found a church that is like that. Now,
Yeah.
how did you how were you able to move past that experience and go, okay, this is not going to make it so that I never go to church again. This is not going to change my beliefs. You mentioned that you follow Jesus, right? So if someone else has experienced something similar to you, where they feel like they had trauma or were judged from an affiliation such as church, or it may not even have to be church. Maybe it's a
Mm.
corporate job. What would be your advice to someone that is going through that? How can they um, move forward and continue to follow what their beliefs are and their passion is, and not turning their back on that because of their past experiences?
First off, don't let 10% of the people ruin 90% of the experience.
I love that.
Because it usually is, it's what I call it the 90-10 rule. 90% of the problems are caused by 10% of the people.
I love that.
Feel free to steal it.
I'm definitely going to, I think I need you to text me that. I'm going to write it right now.
That would be the first thing. And secondly, know who you worship. If you're worshiping the church, if you're worshiping the worship band, if you're worshiping the pastor, if you're worshiping anything that is less than Jesus, it's in the wrong place.
Yep, I completely agree with you.
Who do you rely on? It's like, I rely on Jesus.
Right.
Well, you can't see him. How do you, like, because almost everybody else in the universe is going to let me down at one time or another.
That's really true. Especially
Almost everyone, whether by accident or by malice. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus doesn't. I may not always have what I think I need. I certainly don't always have what I want, but my bills are paid. I have people I love and who love me. I'm doing good things in the world.
Yes, you are.
And
And I
that's
can attest.
because of that relationship.
Right.
Because if I don't have the strength on my own. I just don't. I'm way too selfish.
Well, and I hate it too because, like, you and I, like I said, we met on TikTok and we become really close. I would say really close and good friends. And I know you've met a lot of really close friends on TikTok. But when you were talking about struggling with, or when you came back to the States, having to go into doing what you do now, which is being a healthcare assistant, nursing assistant, home health aide, which, by the way, is amazing. I think I said that already. It's really hard work. But you know what? You deserve to do what makes you happy. And I hate that we don't have the resources right now when it comes to being able to go to counseling and afford it, get your medication and afford it, be where you want to live and afford it, and do what you want to do. And I think that's, like I said earlier, so many people can relate to that. And I just want you to know that you're not alone. And, a lot of people, you're going to help a lot of people with this. You know that?
I hope so.
You
I
are.
really do.
And it's going to come back twofold too. It is. I know it in my heart. Well, I know that there's so many different ways, like I said, we could have gone with what we're talking about, and I know we're getting close to our time, but is there anything that you want to leave us with for other people that have gone through similar situations that you have gone through?
The hardest thing you're ever going to do is reach out for help. It really is. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do. But what you get out of it is so worth it. Reaching out gives you the opportunity to connect. It gives you opportunity not just to get help, but to give help. Reaching out means that you know that you're not alone. There's somebody out there. So yeah, reaching out may be the hardest thing you're ever going to do, but it's also going to be one of the most rewarding. If I hadn't have reached out, I wouldn't have met Christina.
And if I hadn't been vulnerable and shared my story on TikTok, I wouldn't be where I am today and I wouldn't have met you. And I'm so glad I met you.
Likewise.
So glad I met you. And I want you to know, like, I just know it in my heart that things are going to pop off and you're going to be happy. You are. And I hope you know that.
I do. I just get a little
You.
impatient from time to time.
It is. Well, I can totally relate to that too. And so many people can. It is impatient. And it sucks when you can't, like, the cost of living. You know, when I started as a nurse, that I got paid an hour, which as a RN in Charlotte, maybe it's gone up now since COVID, but in Charlotte, I got out of nursing at $20 an hour when people in like California were making $30, $40 an hour. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And I know that they've raised the minimum wage, but that it doesn't reflect the inflation. It doesn't reflect the cost of living. Everything is like skyrocketed. What would be your advice for people that are struggling mentally and say they don't have insurance, or they do have insurance, but they can't afford the copays to get therapy and get medication? What would be your advice to them?
Check with your church, check with your county mental health, check with the county health department. There are so many places where you can at least ask for help.
Yeah.
You may not be able to afford it, but there are places where you might be able to get it for free. I got free counseling from my church for a couple of years.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was a very, very important part of my life. You know, and find someone you can relate to. Find someone you can talk to, because they're there. There's always someone, you know, and that's, again, it's the hardest thing you're ever going to do, but it'll save your life.
It will.
It really will.
If you could have a magic wand and you could, let's say your state, because when it comes to mental health resources, it varies state to state and what they have available and what the resources are available and what the, policies are for mental health. If you had a magic wand and you could make it better for mental health resources and the affordability, whether it's out of pocket or you have insurance but you can't afford, right, the copays, what would be your ask? If you had a political official in front of you right now that can make this change and make it better for your state in Tennessee, what would be your request?
Tennessee doesn't have an income tax. Our state's run on sales tax. My fiscal conservatism is fighting with me now.
Oh, don't be conservative. Tell us what it is, because this is part of the problem. And you and I talked about this at great lengths. We do not have enough mental health resources. And
we do not have enough mental health resources.
We don't.
I live next to an army base, and even the military isn't getting enough of what they need to take care of the mental health issues for our veterans.
And that is sad.
That is really, that's a crime.
Yeah. I mean,
that's just a crime.
And they don't have the resource. That's really sad.
I didn't sacrifice my mental well-being for my country. They did. We should be taking care of them. That would be my first big ask. Take care of our veterans.
Right.
Which
is very noble of you, because again, you're not thinking of yourself and what you're going through currently and taking care of our veterans, which, by the way, shows us how much we love America. We love our country. But it shows how selfless you are.
Even on a sliding scale, you can't get in for less than $50. There needs to be something like a pro bono.
Elaborate on that.
Lawyers have to do so many hours of pro bono for the good work for people who can't afford lawyers.
Right.
I think all medical professionals should be required to do a certain number of pro bono hours. It doesn't have to be a lot. How many people could be helped if all the psychiatrists and all the psychologists in your city did 2 hours of pro bono a week?
Yeah, I think that would be a start. I feel like that would be a start.
Yeah, I think
but But then you raise the question of, would we lose more healthcare workers
It's possible,
because of
but
balance?
it's not like, one of the things you can do with the pro bono is write in, I mean, if it's going to make a law about this, write in that pro bono work is not subject to litigation, because that's what the big stopper is. Like, I'm not getting paid and then I'm getting sued. I don't think so. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to ask people to sacrifice, you need to offer them some protection, because there's no such thing as a free lunch anywhere. Somebody pays for it somewhere. And we're seeing that in the medical field now. One of the reasons everything is so expensive medically is everything is driven by money, and lawsuits run rampant.
Well, and I'll say too, like, we know that mental health, again, trying to stop the stigma associated with it. There is nothing wrong with saying that you're struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD. There's nothing wrong with it. And we, there's nothing wrong with getting help, but we need those better resources.
Yeah, we do.
We just do. We need those better resources because, to your point, not only are we fighting to make a living, to support living and, just living, again, love our country, but we're looking every day to make things better, right? And so when we look at mental health and we look at the things that have gone on in this world, like that happened a week ago, there were mental health issues there. And I'm not saying when people struggle with mental health issues that that's going to happen. I'm not saying that at all, because definitely not saying. But what I am saying is, I feel like these things would be less and less and maybe obsolete if we had those better resources. And I'm so glad that you brought up the things that you are, you having insurance, but still unable to afford the copay, still unable to afford therapy. And thank God places like churches, not every church has it, but some churches have free counseling that can help with that. But just having better resources, which start on a state level, I think the more that we have these conversations, the more we talk about it, the more we share our stories, we stop that stigma associated with it, and we really make a movement to get better resources, we can make it so this country is safe.
Yeah. And not just on the state level, like on the county level. One of the
Yeah.
things that I learned growing up was that if you want change, you've got to change it close to home first. Grassroots movements are usually the most effective, and we need to embrace that as we sally forth into the battle for mental health. We really got to keep an eye on the fact that we need to take care of ourselves here now.
Yeah.
And once everybody gets the idea, like, oh, if we do this, then people are more stable mentally and less likely to do unspeakable things.
Right.
It'll grow.
Exactly. Well, I'm so thankful that I had you on here today. We have to do this again, first of all, because there's so many different things that we still need to talk about. But also I feel like when we do good things in this world, that it comes back twofold. And Patricia, you have done so much for so many people on this app now that you're live streaming as an advocate for mental health and being there for others, that and you do it so selflessly. But you one day are going to have a beautiful home that is going to be yours and paid off. And you one day are going to have the resources you need so that you don't feel like you're stuck. And I know one day I'm going to put it in the air, I'm going to put it in the atmosphere, I'm going to put that energy out there, and I know it's going to come one day. Stay tuned, guys.
I really appreciate you, Christina, and everything you're doing.
Ditto. Likewise. Well, thank you so much, Patricia. I'm so glad I had you on today. Guys, this is not going to be the last time you see Patricia. As you see, we could go on and on and on and talk about so many different topics, but we only have so little time, right? But she will be back and we will have more of these conversations, and we're going to dive more into the things that you've gone through growing up and the struggles that you mentioned earlier. But until then, I'm so glad you joined. So until next time, guys, we'll see you then. Bye.